Okay, so you know how I'm constantly saying that all the best writers were either born in or live in Philadelphia? Celeste Ng was born in Pennsylvania. So apparently, all great writers are born in Pennsylvania. Well, I'm right. Like, this is starting to be more causation than correlation because Kiley Reid, author of Such a Fun Age, one of my new favorite satires of white wokeness, lives there as we speak. Welcome to today's video where you and you, will be discussing one of my new favorite books, which is Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. My name is Maya. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Feel free to subscribe for videos way too often, and if you're returning, welcome back. Okay, Kiley Reid is an author living in the United States. She was born in Los Angeles, moved to Tucson when she was younger, went to high school, graduated high school, went to college, the like. While she was in college, she acted as a nanny for about 6 years, which heavily inspired her experience in writing Such a Fun Age, which centers around a woman named Amira Tucker. Amira Tucker is a babysitter for the Chamberlain family, which is composed of Peter, the father, who is a news anchor, Alix, who is the mother. She's a small business owner. She kind of reminded me of Rachel Hollis, not going to lie, and their 2 children, Catherine and Briar. Briar is the child that Amira is most responsible in babysitting, as Catherine is a newborn and primarily sticks with her mother. Amira is a really fantastic babysitter. She really clicks with Briar. Briar has a really eclectic, sweet, unmarred personality, and she and Amira just have a wonderful relationship. One night, Alix calls Amira. It is later in the evening, probably like 8 or 9, and Amira is at one of her best friend's birthday parties. And Alix calls to ask if Amira can come babysit because they're having a sort of family emergency. So Amira does, and she picks up Briar, and she and her friend Zara, who tags along, take Briar to the local grocery store just to look at the nuts, look at the ice cream, smell the tea, all that jazz. So they're there. They're at the grocery store. They're in an aisle. They are jamming out to Whitney Houston, just having a really fun time dancing together. And all of a sudden, a white security guard and a white customer confront Amira. They don't believe that she is a babysitter or a nanny for this child. In fact, they seem to be under the impression that she stole Briar. This instance of racial profiling is obviously viewed by all of the customers in the store, including one man named Kelly Copeland, who thinks that Amira will want this to be videotaped, documented, and available for her to use to show her instance of racial profiling and maybe make a statement about it. This really awkward and kind of horrifying incident is then followed with the rest of the book with Amira's relationship with the Chamberlain family, specifically Alix, who is suffering severely from white guilt in the aftermath of Amira's grocery store experience. This is a novel that satirizes white wokeness. It also has a lot to do with racism, classism, and just generally microaggressions. I found it to be incredibly interesting, powerful, funny, awkward. The characters were endearing. I really adored this book. Today, I would really like to touch on mainly racism and classism, which are primary themes in the book, but I also want to talk about performative activism, performative indignation, woke culture, virtue signaling, and just really the characters in this book, because I think that Kiley Reid did a really good job of portraying a sort of realness in her characters that I found to be really important to allow the themes of this novel to resonate with a wider audience. Chapter 1. Racism and performative activism. I've watched several interviews that Kiley Reid has had, and in one of them she states that she feels that white supremacy often lurks beneath a smile.
Exactly. I think it's those missteps that come from the really great intentions that she has, and I think that a lot of white supremacy comes with a smile and unknowingness and then these really great intentions.
This book talks about how a lot of the time white families, in this case Alix and her family, are well-intentioned, but they are misguided, and they end up acting with a lot of virtue signaling, performative allyship, and activism. Of course, the first chapter in this book in which Amira is confronted at the grocery store is kind of the supreme example of racial profiling in the book that then leads to all of the other microaggressions that Amira experiences during her job, in her relationships, and really in her community at large. One of the primary microaggressions that I think this book tackled brilliantly was actually virtue signaling. I do think that Alix was a well-intentioned character, which has been confirmed by Kiley Reid in interviews, but her feminism seems very, it feels like the intersectionality is forced, like it's something that is used to make her feel better about herself rather than to help actually fix institutional issues that keep the cycle of poverty and racism and classism intact. Some examples of Alix's virtue signaling are when she points out specific items that she has purchased. This is really more of a classism issue, but she seems very determined to point out to Amira that she bought that rug secondhand, or she got that particular china teapot for sale at the Target.
And Alex is constantly trying to superficially level the playing field with her and saying, oh, I got my shoes at Payless, or I spent, nothing on this rug, as if she would get along with her because of those things. But she's not realizing this girl's really struggling, and so that's where they miss each other.
She seems to be trying to show, oh, I'm so similar to you, but she doesn't realize that Amira is actually struggling. Apart from the racism and sexism she faces in the book, she's also struggling with issues that have faced primarily minorities and people of color forever in American society, from the 1930s and further back. For Amira's instance, that is healthcare coverage. She has a really, really hard time figuring out how she is going to have healthcare, and she knows that she might need to quit her job in order to be able to acquire that service and that right. This idea with healthcare really ties into Kiley Reid's examination of emotional labor and domestic labor, which does not often come with the, in my opinion, rights that all people should have, including healthcare coverage, dental, vision, the things like that. Additionally, this is one instance that really stood out to me and that I've thought about pretty much every day and minute since I've read this book. Alix invites Amira to her Thanksgiving dinner with her boyfriend, and they get there, and we're in Alix's head. Alix is kind of the primary narrator at this point, and she counts the number of African American people at her dinner table. And she feels very proud of herself because she has a whole 5 African American people at her dinner table. Look at how diverse she is. Look at how progressive. I mean, come on. She feels very validated in her own efforts at creating a diverse family, community, set of friends, as opposed to loving the people for who they are while also recognizing how their race has shaped their life experience. It just feels very forced, very performative, and very uncomfortable. Speaking of discomfort, this is something that Kiley Reid masters in such a fun age. In countless interviews, she talks about how interested she is in just awkward moments, how they're her favorite to write because not only do they make the reader squirm a little and promote conversation, but they also can make a really big point.
Probably because I love awkward moments. I just can't get enough of them. When I watch people squirm and when I read something that makes me have to put a book back down, those are my absolute favorite moments. And so it's not fortunate for my characters.
Right.
So that's what I love to read. Yeah.
How many people have asked to touch your hair?
I mean...
For example, Alix's interactions with Amira after the grocery store incident are marred by her white guilt, and because of that, their conversations are incredibly awkward. Not only does this add to plot and character development, but it really highlights the performative wokeness and activism Alix is trying to capture. It really puts an emphasis on microaggressions. I also really enjoyed how this book shows, kind of in a modern context, the history of African American and Black women raising white children.
I think that in many ways this is a really old story. A Black caregiver and a white woman and a white child, and their interactions are really precarious nefarious and charged. And from the very first chapter, Amira is accused of kidnapping this child, and she's humiliated. And I think that what makes it different is someone pulls out a cell phone, and people's relationship to racist incident becomes different when they see it firsthand.
Now it is time to talk about one of the bystanders during Amira's incident at the grocery store. That is Kelly Copeland, who is the white man who feels that Amira will really want this incident captured on camera in the future. Something interesting about Kelly Copeland, and something we find out relatively early on, so this isn't really a spoiler, is that he and Alix dated in high school, and now he not only meets Amira through this racially charged and profiling situation, but they actually end up dating. Kelly Copeland is a really interesting character in that he seems to embody the white obsession with wokeness. I think there's nothing wrong with trying to empathize and learn about the Black experience. It's something I'm really passionate about and always am striving to do. However, I recognize that I will never fully understand the Black experience because race does play a part in life experience. It does play a part in the privileges and opportunities people are afforded in life, and I will just never have that perspective as I am white. Kelly Copeland, however, seems to feel he knows what's best for Amira, and of course this is an isolated individual scale, but it's just a really interesting examination of white wokeness and performative indignation. He is furious about what happened to her at the grocery store. As was I. It was really horrible and awkward to read about because this is people's lived reality. But at the same time, he seems more worried with the fact that it happened than it does happen. What I mean by that is he seems really furious that it happened in his community to this woman he is now dating, as opposed to being furious that it continues to happen at an institutional level. He seems a lot more concerned about burnishing his own image than he does about connecting with Amira as Amira. Yes, her Blackness is a part of her identity, but it's not the entirety of her. You know what I mean? There's another scene in the book, I almost said film, because it really does play out that way in my head. It feels like something that could easily translate to the screen. But another scene that occurred in the novel was Kelly walked into a bar to meet Amira. They'd planned to do this, and he walked in with 4 of his Black friends who were kind of flanking him from behind, and she described just watching him come in as watching a really outdated music video, which I thought was really interesting. Kelly seems more concerned with surrounding himself with Black people to show that he is progressive, he is woke, than he does about really fighting for institutional level change, which is fascinating to me. This actually made me think a lot about the novel White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which I read a while back. Originally, I gave this novel 5 stars. I found it really cool and impactful. But in hindsight, I have actually changed my rating to 3 stars after reading some really interesting articles, particularly on NPR News. I would actually like to read you guys my current Goodreads review for White Fragility, though I know it will constantly adapt and change as I continue to learn and hopefully grow in my lifelong journey of allyship. Current review, 3 out of 5 stars. Recently, DiAngelo's book White Fragility has been garnering more and more criticism. This is natural, as it's also been getting a lot of attention and subsequent praise. I was hesitant to consider negative outlooks on White Fragility. After all, it was a text I found highly enlightening when I read it in early June 2020. However, I think it's really important to challenge confirmation bias, and thus I read many articles, namely by linguist John McWhorter, about how the book falls short. At the time of reading this, I found the book helpful. I think it was extremely well-intentioned, and I definitely learned a lot. Specifically, I found the topics of self-awareness, white women's tears, and action over contemplation to be highly valuable. That said, after reading some criticism of the book, I've had to reevaluate my review. In the words of Dr. McWhorter, this is, quote, a book about how to make certain educated white readers feel better about themselves, end quote. I think there's validity behind this statement. I have also read that White Fragility is quite condescending to the Black community. Though I didn't recognize this in my first read, I do understand it in hindsight. Infantilization is not absent from this novel. I believe this book can be helpful to white people. Then again, it fails to address anything beyond the individual level, potential solutions / ways forward when it comes to the institutional nature of racism. were not discussed enough in the book. So I kind of feel like Kelly Copeland is the character equivalent of white fragility. He seems very well-intentioned and progressive, but is it to make himself feel better, or is it to enact actual change? That's the question. Honestly, Reid's writing reminds me so much of Celeste Ng's, particularly in her novel Little Fires Everywhere. I did do a video on Celeste Ng earlier. If you're interested, it will be linked above. Similarly to Reid, Celeste Ng does not tell the reader what to think. She provides kind of both sides of what's going on. It's really complex. It does talk about classism a lot, specifically Little Fires Everywhere. And honestly, if Celeste Ng and Kiley Reid wrote a book together, if they became an author duo, I would be the happiest human on the planet. Okay, we've discussed Kelly Copeland, the woke white boyfriend. Now it's time to talk about classism and class divides, which is a huge topic within the novel Such a Fun Age. Alik seems to have a really hard time connecting to Amira, and that could definitely be in part due to their different racial lived experiences, but it also has to do with class. One of Alik's best friends is named Tamara. I believe Tamara was a principal at like a really elite school, and she is African American. Alik seems to have absolutely no problem connecting with Tamara and having difficult conversations with Tamara because she can connect to her on a social level. They have the same playing field in terms of class. But when a difference in social standing is introduced between Amira and Alik, she no longer seems to be able to talk to Amira in the way she would talk to Tamara. She seems unable to have conversations that are important, not only for her as an individual to learn and grow, but also on an institutional level. I think I've said institutional level a lot in this video. Maybe there's a reason for that. I don't know. Similarly, in the idea of class, there is a really fascinating dynamic going on here between Alik and Amira. Alik seems more concerned about the fact that Amira doesn't have any social media and she really wants to know about her boyfriend, over the fact that Amira is an incredible babysitter. She does an incredible job with Briar. She makes her happy. She returns her home safe every day, and she's just generally fantastic at her career. Alik doesn't seem so concerned with that. She wants to know more about Amira's personal life, which is fine. It's natural to want to know more about people as they become more prominent in your life. But this book talks a lot about the employer-employee boundary. There needs to be some sort of recognition that this is someone you've hired to provide a service, and it's okay for them to have boundaries. It's okay for them to have their own separate personal life that you do not need to be either involved in or pry into. Again, this touches back on Reid's interest in discussing emotional labor. She's essentially talking about how Alik is paying Amira to give love. And I thought that was a really fascinating topic and one I'm still pondering over. I still have to think about and contemplate because I found it really fascinating and interesting. Though this book does an incredible job of discussing real life issues, including race, class, wokeness, virtue signaling, etc., I think it's also important to talk about how it succeeds as a piece of literature. I think it does a disservice to a book to like it solely because it does a good job of discussing real world problems. It's also important to discuss novels that involve social commentary in the lens of character and plot, because those are equally as important in this book. The first character I would like to talk about is Briar, who is Alik's daughter and the daughter that Amira babysits. Briar has the speech. That's what I want to talk about first. The speech pattern that Briar has is so accurate, and it's very clear that Kiley Reid has experience working with children in a babysitting or nannying position, because Briar's imagination, the way she veers off topic, the way she phrases what she's feeling and what she's thinking, are so realistic to what a child does and is. I also think the female friendships in this book were so well done, and they were very different, which I found very refreshing, because I feel that if female friendship is discussed at all in a book, it's very one-dimensional or shallow. What I loved here is that we got insight into both Alik's group of friends, so more upper-class women whose feminism is more focused on their class, as opposed to Amira's friends, who are just kind of out of college figuring out their lives. I would like to start off by saying that both of the friendship dynamics discussed in this book are totally valid. Alik's friendships are much more girl power friendships. Do you know what I mean? Kind of the uplifting of your friends, but in a way that almost feels competitive. They are friendships that are true, and they do have conversations together that are difficult, and they do uplift each other. But it is in a competitive, kind of bitter, passive-aggressive way, which I actually found really interesting because sometimes that is how female friendships pan out in the real world. However, that is the way that female friendships are most often portrayed, and it's a bit of a stale trope, which is why I so enjoyed Kiley Reid's edition of Amira's Friends. Amira's friendships are a lot more raw and real. They're a bunch of young women straight out of school that are trying to figure out their lives, and in doing so, they truly do help each other. They truly do put aside the time and the effort to connect, to have fun, but also to help each other figure out what's going on in their respective career paths, personal lives, etc. They really look out for each other. I think the primary example of this would be Amira's best friend, Zara. They hang out together, they dance together, they're goofy, but they also help each other out. They're there to support one another, to be the backbone when the other one is maybe stumbling, and I found that really real, really raw, and refreshing, again, because we don't get good female friendships a lot of the time in media, which is really sad to me. Really sad to me. The final character I want to touch on is, of course, Amira Tucker herself. What I love so much about Amira is that she stands out from her counterparts in contemporary fiction. A lot of the time, the main characters in contemporary fiction have a path. And if they don't have a path that's set in stone, they at least have a dream, an ambition, a desire of the way that they want their life to go. Amira, however, has no clue what she wants to do. She doesn't have a particular interest or passion that really inspires her to wake up and go to work every day. And I loved that because it was so real.
Amira is 25. She is a graduate from Temple University. She did 5 years there. Gotta get that victory lap. I did the same thing. And she's in that place where she's constantly comparing herself to her friends and their status. I think there's a place in your 20s where suddenly, I think with jobs and with relationships, suddenly it's, okay, my friend's getting married and I need to spend how much money on this bridesmaid's dress, and we're going where, and I have these bills to pay, and how are we supposed to be doing this? And so Amira's a bit lost because she doesn't have this guiding thing, this passion that she's always wanted to do, and that leaves her feeling a bit inadequate. And so I wanted to create this kind of perfect mediocre B student who's a really talented person in other aspects, and someone over there is a B student as well.
That was a laugh of recognition.
Yeah.
Young people, a lot of the time, don't know what they want to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do until this year, and as I am 16, it's likely that what I want to do will evolve and change and shift, and I'm excited for that, but I'm also scared. It's kind of a scary, anxiety-invoking process, and I think that Reid captured that exceptionally well with Amira's character. She showed the amount of potential Amira has, but the way that that potential hasn't quite yet found its perfect medium, the way through which it wants to introduce itself to the world. Ultimately, Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid was hilarious, it was awkward, it was smart, it was witty, it was very nuanced in its expression of and analysis of microaggressions, whether those be related to race or class. I adored this book. I would highly encourage you to read Such a Fun Age. There is no doubt in my mind that you will connect somehow with one character or another, with some plot point or another. You will laugh at the ridiculously awkward moments. You'll be horrified by those that are racially charged, and you'll realize that virtue signaling is everywhere. It's everywhere. None of us are exempt from it. None of us are innocent to it. I'm positive that I have virtue signaled in my life, because that's kind of the way our society is structured. People are more interested in making themselves look good than they are about instituting actual change. And I think this book was incredible at touching on that. I definitely learned a lot. I loved the characters. I gave it a solid 4.5 stars. Also, I just want to mention before I go that the Reading Rush missed out a lot. They missed out on a really great opportunity with this book to discuss performative activism and really introduce a book by a Black author to a wider audience. That said, there is another book club. Mayona from Mayona Reads is a major part of it. I will have them linked below, and they are doing a discussion of Such a Fun Age in August. If they haven't already by the time this video comes up, I would highly recommend you check it out. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you will pick up Such a Fun Age. If you do, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, good grief, I really need to memorize the days of the week. Until Thursday, I will see you later. Bye-bye.